Paul Jennings has written more than 100 stories. He's won every Australian Children's Choice Book Award going, and the top-rating TV series Round the Twist and Driven Crazy were based on a selection of his enormously popular short story collections. Now, at the age of 77, Paul has written a memoir fittingly titled Untwisted. Paul Jennings, welcome to Drive.
Thanks, Jeff. Lovely to be talking with you.
And nice to talk to you. And on behalf of parents everywhere, Paul, thank you for writing the stories that our kids wanted to read.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to look back and remember all those exciting times when I was writing those. It was a big part of my life.
I really love this observation from your book, which referenced what you called the nicest letter you reckon you'd ever received, and it came from an 11-year-old boy. Do you remember it?
Yes, I think it was pretty short. He said, "Dear Paul Jennings, how come you know what it's like to be me?" And I thought that was a wonderful compliment because, of course, I don't know what it's like to be him, but I do know what it's like to be a child and put myself in the position of a child when I'm writing. And even though I was 40 when I started writing for children, I was able to somehow put myself in their shoes and remember that first day at school, the disappointments, the fears, what it was like being a little person. And you can't really write for children, I guess, unless you can do that. So it was the ultimate compliment from one of my readers.
Paul, you say in the book that the boy in the story is always me, and I find there's something really beautiful about that, because you might be a 77-year-old fella these days, but the kid lives on. How important is it, do you think, that the kid does live on in us?
Yes, well, your childhood is so important to who you turn out to be. It's one of the reasons I wrote this biography, to sort of look back and see, well, what was it that made me a writer, and what was it that enabled me to write stories? And it was interesting to go through this process and look back and see the injuries of childhood and some of the joys and the woundings, and see how they sort of emerge in your stories, particularly the themes. Like I had a theme that kept erupting all the time, which was separation of the parent and the child. And that's an incredibly strong theme, because for a parent to lose a child is an incredibly horrible thing, and the same for the child to lose a parent. And I'd be writing stories, and in the end I'd say, "Oh, I've done it again." And I sort of said to myself, no more stories with that theme, Paul, but it does just show how important it is. You know, I was separated from my grandmother, who was really my carer when we lived in England.
Yes.
And when we came to Australia, she was coming with us, but the night before we would get on the boat, she had a dream that she'd die on the boat. She wouldn't come. And I never saw her again. And that was a huge loss for me at 6 years of age. So those sort of early woundings are with us even through to our old age.
Paul Jennings is my guest. He has written his memoir. And Paul, you write in this memoir, extensively about your parents, and you tell the story of your dad, and you often quote your dad through a series of short, sharp exchanges that obviously never left you. You'll never be fit for anything but the workshop, or you'll never pass, or the silly son always gets put into the clergy or the army. And then you note just one remark from your mum that says, "I think that girl in the library is sweet on you, Paul."
Yes, and I mean, people say, when you write a biography, you shouldn't use direct speech and report speech the way you say it, because you could never remember what you were saying like 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. But some little things stick in your head, and all of those I can actually remember. And I was wounded by my father. Really didn't want a son. In fact, I don't think he wanted children at all. My sister felt the same. and he never expected me to amount to anything, and he let me know that. And he, when I was in year 11, he said to me that your friend Timothy, who was a year ahead of me, he failed his matriculation, and you're not as smart as him, so you won't be able to do it. So I had to leave school, and I was bundled off at the age of 17 to teachers' college, and his belief that I was no good, I'd sort of embraced it myself. But I did manage to do my matriculation at night school, and finally get a university degree. When he came to the graduation, his comment was, you didn't get honours. And that sort of, whereas my mother, as you pointed out, Jeff, one little saying, that girl in the library thinks she's sweet on you and she's got good taste. It just shows how important it is to praise your children and to let them feel that they're good.
A little tick of affirmation in a kid's life.
That's right, exactly.
You had a great passion for teaching kids to read, and then you would embark on this other career to write the books that made them want to read. How do you reflect on that, Paul? Because I know you became very, very famous, probably quite wealthy. Your personal circumstances, from what I've read in the book, were often quite tumultuous. But the very essence of what you have succeeded here, encouraging kids to write and then writing what they want to read, do you reflect on that with a great deal of pride?
Well, yes, I guess I do. The first class I had, I was only 18 years old when I started teaching them, and there were 15 children with learning disabilities, and I knew nothing about teaching children with those problems. I was just straight out of college. And some people from the psychology and guidance branch came to see me, and I could tell they were appalled that an ex-student had been given this class. And as they left, one of them said to me, look, if you can find a book that every one of them can read and wants to read, you'll have at least done something. And I sort of accepted that as a challenge. And I could find a book that they could read, but I found it hard to find one they wanted to read.
Yes.
But it took me, another 20 years before I actually put pen to paper. But in all that time, I had been working with children in areas of learning disability in one way or another.
Paul Jennings is my guest on the Drive program at 6 minutes to 6 o'clock. If you get the opportunity to read this memoir, I think you will rip through it the way your kids would rip through anything that Paul wrote. Now, I mentioned, Paul, that you've written more than 100 short stories. And your book tells me you always think you will never come up with another decent one. Why the self-doubt?
Well, actually, it is so hard. I mean, I read somewhere that Enid Blyton could just knock them out, and she did. She knocked out hundreds of books, and I think she sold over 600 million.
Yes.
But for me, it's wringing it out. I sit down there and looking for a good idea, throwing things in the bin, starting, restarting, and it is really quite hard. And I'll be scribbling away in my little book, and then suddenly something will click, and I'll write down yes, and then I'm away and I'm enjoying it.
But the task, and it's one of those things, isn't it, that a lot of people think it looks easy, but you have to use the appropriate language for children. You are paring everything back all the time. A couple of years ago, I spent a little bit of time with Dame Linley Dodd, who wrote the Hare and McClary stories, and she was every single word mattered to her, every single word.
Yes, that's right. I wouldn't ever put anyone off having a go at it, because you never know what you can do. But I did spend a fair bit of time looking at the literature and just what makes a story easy to read. And, there's some obvious things like make your character called Tim or Tom, but not Christopher, because it's a harder word to read. Your sentences can be shorter. And, of course, the first sentence has got to really hook them in, because adults will read 20 or 30 pages before they give up on a book, but the kids will give you one page or even one paragraph or one line before they decide it's no good.
Yeah.
So it's really quite hard work, and just about every adult writer seems to have a go at a kid's book, thinking they'll knock one out pretty quickly, and they usually find out it's a lot harder than it looks.
What did success bring you? Because you had enormous amount of fame, and I would imagine you had a few quid, and you also had a few cars. And did you actually have a glass-fronted garage?
Yes,
show off?
My shame. I blush now, but I did get carried away with it. And when my first book did hit the bestseller list, I was incredibly naive about a lot of aspects of the world, and for my first little proper tour, I did with great trepidation, and I didn't know where to sit in the restaurant. You wouldn't believe this, but very quickly I adapted, and very quickly. The travelling around business class and so on. And
did it go to your head?
It did. It went to my head big time. My publisher, Penguin, flew me from New York to London in a Concorde, and I ended up, I had 7 cars. I was very keen on the historic cars, like E-Type Jaguar, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I had this big garage made with a glass fronted doors so that I could look at them as I walked past. But I later realised, no, that was for everyone else to look at them, Paul. You'd find yourself looking at your reflection in the shop windows, and it did cause a lot of unhappiness. You started to feel privileged, and I did get quite depressed, and I had mental health problems, and I ended up going to a very wise therapist for quite a long time. But I said to him, do you think it's all right to have 7 cars? And I said, they're worth a lot of money. And he said, I thought he'd say to me, well, look, think of all the good you could do with that money, Paul. But what he said was, your ego might be able to handle it, but mine couldn't. And I straight away knew he was right. The whole thing had just gone to my head. And I sold them all except one, and it did show me that you had to work on yourself. Even at 77, this memoir is really an effort to see my life, try and put it into perspective. And
yes,
it's like looking at it from a bird's eye view, like a map spread out, and you can see all these things in your past and think, oh, that's why I did that. And
well, I can tell you, it's an absolutely fantastic read. It doesn't matter who you write for. You write absolutely beautifully. Paul Jennings, thank you so much for joining me